The Ohio humidity pressed down on the Appalachian foothills, a heavy, wet blanket over the endless green of summer. It was a silence measured in the buzz of cicadas, a stillness in the vast, sweltering landscape that seemed to stretch on forever. The sky was a hazy, unforgiving white, and the sun beat down on the dense forests and rolling cornfields, drawing the moisture from every living thing. This was a place of rugged beauty, a land for survivors. For most, it was a place to drive through quickly. For Caleb Hayes, it was the closest thing he had to a home. Caleb ran with a long, steady gait, his boots kicking up puffs of dark, rich soil. He was a man made of disciplined muscle and a powerful quiet, his features sharp, his eyes the color of a stormy sky, weary, but missing nothing. As a Navy SEAL, his body was a tool honed for worlds far removed from this peaceful emptiness. His work was loud, chaotic, and filled with the adrenaline of close-quarters conflict. This quiet farm, this vast green emptiness, was his decompression chamber. He was on leave, a rare break from the rhythm of deployment, and he'd come here, to his grandfather's old farm, to clear his head and honor a memory. The land had belonged to a quiet, weathered man who'd spoken more to his crops than to people. His grandfather had found peace in the solitude, in the simple, unforgiving logic of farm life. Caleb had loved the man, but the quiet had suffocated him as a boy. He'd chosen the Trident over the tractor, the ocean over the Ohio River. Now, returning after the old man's passing, Caleb found himself craving the very silence he'd once fled. The stillness forced him to confront the noise in his own head, the echoes of missions past and the uncertainty of the future. Running beside him, step for step, was Max. Max was a German shepherd, noble and imposing, though his muzzle was graced with distinguished gray hairs. At 8 years old, he was retired, and he carried his own scars. Unlike the local farm dogs, Max moved with a military precision, his intelligent eyes constantly scanning, his gait powerful and sure. He was Caleb's partner, his shadow in the truest sense, and the living, breathing reason Caleb was still alive. The steady rhythm of the run, the synchronized beat of boots and paws in the dirt, pulled Caleb back, as it always did, to a different kind of heat, a different kind of dust, Kandahar. The air had tasted of copper and fear. They were on patrol, moving through a village that felt wrong, too quiet. The world had vanished in a flash of blinding white and a deafening roar. The eyed blast had thrown Caleb against a wall, shattering his leg and filling his world with a ringing silence. He was exposed, disoriented, the rest of his team pinned down by the ensuing ambush. Through the smoke and the pain, a dark shape emerged. Max. The dog was frantic, barking, but it wasn't out of fear. It was a command. Max, ignoring the bullets that chewed up the dust around him, had latched his powerful jaws onto Caleb's body armor and begun to pull. He dragged his 190-pound handler backward, inch by agonizing inch, toward the makeshift cover of a ruined doorway. Max hadn't left him. He had laid over Caleb, barking furiously at their attackers until the team could fight their way forward. It wasn't until later, in the chaos of the medevac, that Caleb realized the dog was bleeding. A piece of shrapnel had torn through Max's shoulder. The wound was severe, ending his distinguished career as a military working dog. Now, he was simply Caleb's dog, a title he seemed to wear with the same quiet pride as his service medals. Theirs was a bond forged in loyalty, sealed in fire and blood. That memory was why Caleb ran. He ran to prove his leg was still strong. And he ran because Max, though retired, still needed a mission. Their mission today was endurance, 10 miles through the backwoods, far from any paved road. They were deep into the run, the sun climbing toward its peak, when the rhythm broke. Max stopped. He didn't just slow down, he went rigid, his body locking in an instant. Caleb halted immediately, his own senses screaming to attention. He scanned the dense tree line. A hawk, a coyote. "What is it, boy?" Caleb whispered, laying a hand on the dog's powerful neck. Max ignored him, his head high, ears canted forward, his black nose twitching rapidly as he tasted the air. A low, soft whine escaped his throat. This wasn't a rabbit alert. This wasn't a snake alert. This was his work alert. The posture was unmistakable. It was the same stance he'd taken moments before identifying a hidden weapons cache. Caleb's demeanor shifted. The sun visiting his past was gone, replaced by the operator. He trusted the dog's instincts more than his own eyes. "Show me," he said, his voice low. Max moved forward, not running, but at a purposeful trot, his focus locked on something around the next bend in the trail. Caleb followed, his own steps now light, his eyes scanning the terrain for threats, his mind analyzing the wind direction. What had the dog smelled? Not gunpowder. Just the dry scent of summer dust and hot leaves. And something else, something faint and acrid. Leaking gasoline. Max led him off the packed dirt trail, toward the edge of a steep, wooded embankment that dropped sharply into a creek bed. The gully was 30 feet deep, its banks a steep tumble of dirt and rock, overgrown with thick brush. The dog stopped at the edge, looking down. Caleb came up beside him and followed his gaze. His blood ran cold. Down in the gully, hidden from the trail, was a vehicle. It was a county sheriff's cruiser, bearing the brown and gold insignia of the Ross County Sheriff's Department. It was nose down, crumpled against a large oak tree. It hadn't just rolled. It looked as if it had been driven off the edge at speed. A thin wisp of steam or perhaps smoke rose from the crushed engine block. The vehicle was perfectly still. The silence that had been peaceful moments before now felt heavy and menacing. Caleb processed the scene in a heartbeat. No tracks on this side of the gully. The crash was recent. The engine was still hot, but there was no movement. No one climbing out. No one calling for help. Max looked up at Caleb, his intelligent eyes asking a question. Caleb gave the dog the hand signal for stay. His mind was already calculating the fastest, safest path down the treacherous slope. Caleb did not move to the edge. He held up a closed fist, the silent command that Max obeyed instantly. The dog froze, dropping low to the ground, his brown and black coat blending perfectly with the dry undergrowth. Caleb's heart beat a steady, controlled rhythm against his ribs. The operator had taken over. The son on leave was gone. He trusted Max's work alert implicitly. It meant there was a person, and there was a threat. He pulled a small monocular from his pack. He didn't risk silhouetting himself against the bright sky. Instead, he crawled on his belly to a cluster of sun-bleached rocks, finding a small gap that gave him a view of the gully below. He brought the optic to his eye. The sheriff's cruiser was down there, just as he'd seen it, but his initial assessment was wrong. It wasn't crumpled from the impact. It was parked, tilted at an awkward angle, as if the driver had tried to turn too sharply. Both drivers' side tires were flat, shredded. The driver's side window was a spiderweb of shattered glass. The wisp of steam he'd seen wasn't steam at all. It was heat shimmer, a distorted mirage rising off the dark paint of the cruiser, warped by the vapor rising from a punctured radiator. He adjusted the focus. He held his breath. There was movement. A flicker of a dark blue uniform inside the car, toward the passenger side. Someone was alive. Someone was hiding. Then the summer silence was torn apart. Crack. The sound was sharp, definitive. It wasn't the low boom of a handgun. It was the supersonic whip of a high-velocity rifle round moving faster than the sound it made. A millisecond later, the slap of the bullet hitting metal echoed off the trees. A new, gleaming silver dimple appeared on the cruiser's engine block. Caleb didn't flinch. He swept his monocular across the opposite bank, the only logical place for a shooter. It took him less than 10 seconds. There. 400 yards away, nestled in a well-concealed hunter's blind built into a thicket of oaks, he saw the faint distortion of a heat signature that wasn't rising from the trees, but from a rifle barrel. A glint. A scope. This wasn't a crash. This wasn't a breakdown. This was a siege. A calculated execution. Deputy Kate Sullivan gritted her teeth, tasting the copper of fear and the grit of the forest floor. She was pressed against the passenger side door, the only part of the vehicle that offered any real cover. "Stupid, Kate. Stupid. Stupid," she whispered, the words lost in the ringing in her ears. Kate was a 5-year veteran of the Ross County Department, a woman known for her quiet competence and unyielding determination. She had dark hair, now matted to her forehead with sweat, and eyes that had seen too much in this supposedly quiet county. She'd been a big city cop until a personal tragedy had driven her to the countryside, looking for peace. She hadn't found any. The call had been a perfect trap. A report of illegal dumping way out on a fire road, miles from the main highway. It was exactly what she'd been secretly investigating for months, the dark side of Marcus Thorne's lucrative industrial operations. She'd been so sure she was on the verge of a breakthrough that she had ignored protocol. She hadn't logged her destination. She hadn't requested backup. She had driven out alone. The first shot had taken out her front tire, sending the cruiser skidding into the gully. The second had destroyed the rear. The third had torn through her radio console, filling the cab with the smell of ozone and burning plastic. The fourth had been for her. It had ripped through the door frame, spraying shrapnel and part of the bullet into her left shoulder. Now she was bleeding. The wound was a deep, searing gouge, like a hot coal pressed to her flesh, but it wasn't fatal. The heat was what would kill her. The temperature inside the cruiser was already well over 100 degrees. Her water bottle, which she'd grabbed before crawling down low, was almost empty. She allowed herself one small sip, sloshing the warm water around her cracked lips before swallowing. Not enough. She looked at her service pistol, lying on the floor mat beside her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for it. She ejected the magazine. Empty. She had fired all 15 rounds toward the tree line in a useless, angry response, but she knew, as all officers did, that she had one left. She pulled the slide back just enough to check. There it was. A single, brass-cased round in the chamber. Kate took a deep, shuddering breath. That bullet wasn't for the shooter. It was for her. She would not let them drag her out of this car. She would not let them take her. Her resolve hardened. The sniper in the woods could take her life, but he couldn't have her. From his observation point, Caleb watched and analyzed. The shooter was good, patient. He was using the thick summer foliage and the heat mirage rising from the ground to conceal his position, while that same mirage made a return shot from the deputy's position nearly impossible. The distance was challenging, but not for a trained marksman. The shooter wasn't trying to penetrate the car's engine block for a kill. He was disabling it. He was pinning his target. This was a professional. Caleb recognized the pattern: flat tires, destroyed radio, a non-fatal but debilitating wound. The sniper didn't intend to miss. He intended to wait. He was going to let the Ohio sun do the heavy lifting. It was brutal, efficient, and left little evidence. In a few hours, she'd be incapacitated by heatstroke. By evening, she'd be gone. Caleb's jaw tightened. He and Max were the only variables in this equation. The sniper didn't know they were here. He looked at Max. The dog was trembling, not with fear, but with anticipation. He knew this drill. His intelligent eyes were locked on Caleb, waiting for the signal. "Not yet, boy," Caleb whispered. He backed away from the rock, moving into a shallow depression where he was out of sight. He needed a plan. He had no rifle, only the sidearm he was permitted to carry on leave. A handgun at 400 yards was impossible. That left one option: close the distance. He'd have to cross the open valley, get to the creek bed, and use the gully itself as a trench to approach the cruiser. But the last 100 yards was open, a sloping bank of dirt and gravel. The sniper would see him instantly. He needed a diversion. A big one. He looked back at the tree line. The shooter was comfortable. He had the high ground, the superior weapon, and all the time in the world. Caleb checked his watch. The heat was intensifying. The deputy in the cruiser did not have all the time in the world. He and Max began to move, not toward the sniper, but in a wide, flanking arc, keeping the ridge between them and the shooter. They would approach the gully from behind, upstream. As they moved, Max stopped suddenly, nosing at something half buried in the dirt near a bush. Caleb knelt. It was a brass casing, a 308, but this one was old, tarnished. This wasn't the sniper's position. This was where someone had been practicing. No, Caleb realized. This was where the sniper had zeroed his rifle, probably days ago. He knew this spot. He had planned this ambush precisely. Caleb's respect for his adversary grew, along with his anger. He patted Max on the head. "Come on, boy. Change of plans." They reached the back of the gully and began their approach, moving low and fast, the dirt soft under their feet and paws. They got to within 100 yards of the cruiser. Caleb could hear her now, a faint, pained cough. He moved up, his back against the earthen bank until he could see her through the shattered rear window. He watched her pick up the handgun. He watched her eject the empty magazine. He watched her check the chamber. He saw her look at that single round. He understood. He knew exactly what that last bullet meant. Max whined, a low, distressed sound. He could smell her pain, her fear. Caleb put a firm hand on the dog's flank. "Easy," he whispered, his voice a low rumble. "We're going in. But we're doing it my way." The image of Kate Sullivan checking the single round in the chamber burned itself into Caleb's mind. There was no time for a complex plan. There was only time for action. He was 100 yards out, separated by an open, sun-scorched stretch of gravel and dirt. The sniper in the tree line was patient, comfortable, and held all the power. Caleb had to shatter that power dynamic. He had to shatter the sniper's comfort. He looked at Max. The shepherd was vibrating with pent-up energy, his intelligent dark eyes fixed on Caleb, waiting for the one word he lived for. Caleb leaned in close, his lips brushing the dog's pricked ear. He pointed across the gully toward the opposite bank. It was a barren slope with no cover, but it was in a different quadrant from the sniper's current focus. "Max," Caleb whispered, his voice low and firm. Zigzag. Go. It was a command from their shared past. It meant run fast, run erratic, and draw fire. Max didn't hesitate. He shot away from Caleb's side like a black and tan missile. He scrambled up the steep bank of the gully and burst onto the flat Ohio farmland, not in a straight line, but in a powerful, unpredictable zigzag pattern. He was a blur of motion, kicking up a trail of dark soil, a living, barking target charging into the open. 400 yards away, the sniper saw the movement through his scope. His concentration, which had been lazily fixed on the immobile sheriff's cruiser, snapped. A K-9. Where the hell did a K-9 come from? His professional calm fractured, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. A dog meant a handler. The situation had just changed from a simple execution to a complex threat. He swore under his breath, wrenching the heavy rifle barrel away from the cruiser and swinging it toward the charging dog. The shepherd was fast, much faster than a human target, and its erratic path made tracking difficult. He led the dog by a foot, squeezed the trigger, and prayed. Crack! The rifle report echoed flatly across the fields. The shot missed. Max didn't even flinch. The bullet kicked up a geyser of dirt a yard to his left, and the dog just changed direction, continuing his high-speed diversion. But that one shot was all Caleb needed. The instant the sound of the rifle reached him, Caleb was moving. He exploded from the cover of the gully, body low, legs pumping. He wasn't just running. He was performing a tactical sprint, the kind that had carried him across open alleys and hostile cities. He sprinted 10 yards, then dropped, rolling behind a pathetic-looking patch of weeds that offered no real cover, only visual disruption. He was up in a second. He knew the sniper would be chambering a new round, his eye still trying to reacquire the fast-moving dog. Caleb had maybe 3 seconds. He covered another 20 yards, gravel crunching under his boots. Inside the cruiser, Kate heard the second shot. It hadn't hit her. It sounded different, farther away. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Close. Crunching on gravel, fast and heavy. Her blood turned to ice. He's coming down, he's coming to finish it. Survival instinct and training overrode the haze of pain and heat. She grabbed the handgun from the floor mat. This was it. The last bullet. She would not die on her knees. She scrambled up, grimacing as her wounded shoulder screamed, and repositioned herself behind the relative safety of the engine block. She leveled the weapon toward the front of the cruiser, hands trembling, breath coming in ragged gasps. She steadied her grip with both hands, pulling back the hammer. Caleb covered the last 50 yards in a desperate, lung-burning sprint. He didn't run to the door. He ran past the vehicle, using its mass as a moving shield, coming around the front bumper. A man's shape blurred into her vision. He was tall, big, and moving with terrifying speed. He rounded the front of the truck. Kate let out a raw cry and centered the handgun's sights squarely on his chest. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Wait! Caleb yelled, freezing in a half-crouch, his hands slightly raised, palms out. Their eyes locked. The world seemed to stop. The crushing heat, the ringing in her ears, the pain in her shoulder. It all fell away. Caleb saw her. He saw the sweat and dirt streaking her face, her dark hair plastered to her scalp. He saw the terror in her eyes, but beneath it, he saw an iron core of defiance. She was hurt, exhausted, and dying of heat. But she was still a warrior, ready to pull him down with her. He saw resilience. Kate saw him. He wasn't the enemy. He wasn't the killer from the tree line. His eyes weren't cold or malicious. They were an incredible, clear blue, and they were filled with an impossible, assessing calm. He wasn't here to hurt her. He was here to help. In that single, stretched moment, she knew it with absolute certainty. She sought trust. Her hands began to shake violently. A choked sob escaped her lips. The gun lowered, then fell from her numb fingers, clattering onto the dirt. He's in the trees, she whispered, the last of her adrenaline deserting her. I know, Caleb said, his voice dropping, becoming a gentle anchor. He moved forward, his eyes never leaving hers, and knelt beside her. I'm Caleb. You're safe. He put a hand on her uninjured shoulder, a simple, grounding touch. At the same moment, Max, his mission complete, bounded down into the gully and came to a stop beside Caleb, his chest heaving, pink tongue lolling. The dog immediately nudged his head under Kate's hand in a gesture of comfort. Caleb glanced back at the tree line. He didn't need his monocular to know the sniper was gone. The observer on the ridge had seen it all. He'd missed the dog, a blow to his professional pride. Then he'd seen the second man, the operator, moving with a speed and efficiency that told him this was no local hiker. This was a professional like himself. His mission was compromised. His target was no longer isolated. His position was blown. He was now facing two mobile targets, one K9, the other a man who moved like a ghost. A professional knows when to cut his losses. He'd be gathering his brass, packing his rifle, and melting back into the landscape, gone as if he'd never been there. The silence of the summer afternoon returned, but its oppressive, threatening weight was gone. Now there was only the wind, the heat, and the sound of breathing. Kate looked at the man, then at the magnificent dog beside him. "Where," she began, her voice cracking. "Where did you come from?" "Just out for a run," Caleb said, his voice quiet. He was already shrugging off his small hydration pack. "Let me see that shoulder." "My name's Caleb." "That's Max. We're going to get you out of here." Kate leaned her head back against the hot metal of the cruiser, closing her eyes for just a moment. She felt the solid warmth of the dog against her leg and heard the competent voice of the man as he began to tend to her wound. He had said she was safe, and for the first time since that 911 call, she believed it. The adrenaline that had held Kate Sullivan together evaporated, leaving her shivering despite the oppressive heat. The world began to tilt, the green woods blurring at the edges. "Hey," Caleb's voice cut through the fog, sharp but not harsh. "Stay with me, deputy. You're safe, but we're not done." He was on his knees, his movements economical and precise. He had his small tactical pack open. "This car is a hotbox," he said, his eyes scanning the gully. "We're moving." Kate tried to push up with her good arm, but her muscles felt like water. I can walk." Caleb didn't offer to help. He simply slid one arm behind her back and the other under her knees and lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. The strength he used was so easy, so controlled, it was too sudden and absolute for her to even protest. He carried her 20 yards to the other side of the gully, where the steep earthen wall of the creek bed created a patch of deep, merciful shade. He set her down gently, leaning her against the cooler dirt and rock. Max immediately moved to her side, not crowding, just sitting close, a solid, warm presence that was surprisingly comforting. "First things first," Caleb said. He pulled the hose of the water bladder from his pack. He didn't ask if she was thirsty. He just put the bite valve near her lips. "Water. Small sips. Don't chug." Kate obeyed. The water was warm from his pack, but it was the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. It slid down her parched throat, washing away the dust and the metallic taste of fear. He let her drink for a moment before pulling the hose back. "Good. Now, the shoulder." He set his pack down and unzipped it. It wasn't a hiker's pack. Inside, Kate saw neatly arranged, vacuum-sealed items. It was a trauma kit. He looked at Max. The dog was on alert, his eyes scanning the top of the ridge where the sniper had been. "Max," Caleb said quietly. The dog's head swiveled. "Backtrack." "Find," he gestured vaguely up the gully in the direction they'd come. He was sending the dog back to the practice spot where they'd found the old casing. "Go." Max was off, a silent brown and black streak disappearing into the gully. Caleb turned his full attention back to Kate. "This won't be pleasant," he said, his voice softening just a fraction. "I need to see the wound. I'm going to have to cut your shirt." Kate just nodded, her vulnerability complete. She was an officer used to being in control. Now she was disarmed, wounded, and being cared for by a stranger who moved with the confidence of a force of nature. Caleb produced a small pair of trauma shears from his kit. His hands, she noticed, were rough. They were not a hiker's hands. They were scarred, the knuckles calloused, the skin tanned from sun and hard work. They were a soldier's hands, powerful, capable of great force. He slipped the blunt end of the shears under the thick fabric of her uniform shirt at the collar. He cut downward, his movements quick and sure, splitting the fabric at the shoulder seam. He was careful, his touch surprisingly light, his fingers brushing her uninjured skin as he peeled the blood-soaked fabric away from the wound. Kate hissed as the cloth pulled at the torn flesh, but she held still. "I see it," he said. He was all business. The calm monotone of his voice kept her grounded. "It's A through and through. The bullet and fragments from the door went straight through the muscle. It's bleeding, but it missed the artery. You're lucky." "Lucky?" she repeated, her voice dry. The barest hint of a grim smile touched his lips. "In my line of work? Yeah. This is lucky." He pulled out a sterile saline pouch and a stack of gauze. "This is going to be cold. I'm flushing it. Just breathe." Kate braced herself, but the cool rush of the saline was a relief from the burning heat of the wound. She watched him work. His strong, scarred hands now moved with the precision of a surgeon. He cleaned the entry and exit wounds, his touch firm but remarkably gentle. There were no wasted movements. He was completely focused, his blue eyes narrowed as he assessed the damage. He was talking, she realized, his voice a low, steady drone. Grew up near here, he said, not looking up from his work. My grandfather had a farm just north of Chillicothe. Hated the heat. Joined the Navy, saw the world, and now I'm back. He wasn't asking her questions. He wasn't demanding answers. He was just filling the silence, giving her mind something to hold on to besides the pain. I'm Kate, she managed, her voice weak. I know, Deputy Sullivan, he said, pulling a set of butterfly closures and a small sterile dressing from their packaging. I saw your name tag. This is the part that's going to hurt. He began applying a few of the strips to the worst of the exit wound. His calloused fingers expertly pulled her skin together. She winced, but he didn't stop. Almost done. You're doing good. Just keep breathing. Despite the pain, Kate felt an incredible, undeniable sense of peace. The panic that had gripped her in the cruiser was gone. This man, Caleb, had materialized out of the empty woods like a phantom, and in minutes he had taken absolute control. He had brought order to her chaos. She studied his face as he worked, the strong line of his jaw, the focus in his eyes. He was the first person to make her feel safe in a very long time. Okay, he said, applying a final pressure dressing. Done. It's not pretty, but it'll hold until you get to a hospital. He packed his kit, his movements as clean and precise as his medical work. As he zipped the bag, a shadow fell over them. Max was back. He stood before Caleb, chest silently heaving, his tail giving one short, clipped wag. He dropped a small, dry bag at Caleb's feet. It was covered in dirt and dog drool. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Good boy, he whispered, rubbing the dog's head. Good boy. What did you find? Kate watched, confused, as Caleb picked up the bag. It was a small, military-style pouch. He broke the waterproof seal and turned it upside down. 2 items fell into his hand. The first was a spare, high-powered rifle scope, the exact kind a sniper might use. The second was a small, handheld GPS unit. Caleb picked up the GPS, his thumb brushing the dirt from the screen. He hit the power button. The screen flickered to life in the shade of the gully. It was still on. A map appeared showing their current location. And in the center of the screen, a single waypoint blinked, steady and insistent. It was labeled M. The blinking waypoint on the GPS screen was a beacon. It was labeled Fire Warden Station 4B. It was 3 miles to the northeast through the most rugged and unforgiving terrain the Ohio backcountry had to offer. Caleb looked at Kate. The temporary calm his medical attention had provided was fading. Her skin was pale and clammy, and her eyes were having trouble focusing. The pressure dressing on her shoulder was already darkening with fresh blood. The heat, her wound, and the shock were a deadly combination. Staying here was not an option. Kate, he said, his voice firm, pulling her focus back to him. Are you with me? She gave a weak nod, her head lolling against the earthen wall. Yeah. The mine. Thorne's mine. We'll get to Thorne, Caleb said, his voice a low, steady promise. He tucked the sniper's GPS into his own pack. Right now, we're moving. There's an old fire warden station 3 miles from here. I'm taking you there. I can't walk, Caleb, she whispered, the admission costing her. You don't have to, he said simply. He stood and turned his back, crouching low in front of her. Good arm around my neck. Kate hesitated for only a second before following the command. She hooked her right arm over his broad shoulders. Caleb wrapped his own arms back under her, one high on her back, the other under her knees, and stood. The grunt he made wasn't from her weight. She was light. It was from the awkwardness of the lift, the dead weight of an injured person. He settled her against his chest, her head resting in the crook of his uninjured shoulder. He looked at Max. Lead, he ordered. Find the station. Watch for danger. Max's posture changed instantly. He was no longer a companion. He was a working K-9 on a mission. He moved out 10 yards ahead of them, nose down, ears swiveling, scanning the path for snakes, hazards, and the easiest possible footing. Caleb set off, his pace steady and powerful. The first 100 yards were an agony, not for him, but for her. Every step jolted her wounded shoulder. A pained hiss escaped her lips and she buried her face in his neck, her breath shuddering. I know, he murmured, the vibration of his voice in her ear. I know. Just hold on. The weight in his arms was familiar. Too familiar. The sun beating down on his neck and the dark Ohio soil of the gully melted away, replaced by the choking gray dust of Kandahar. The weight in his arms wasn't Kate anymore. It was Reaper, his teammate. They were pinned down, a catastrophic ambush, and Reaper was bleeding out. His chest was a ruin. Caleb was carrying him to the extraction point, a 2-mile run under heavy fire. Reaper was conscious, just barely, his words a wet gurgle. Tell them. Tell them He had died in Caleb's arms, 70 yards from the helicopter. Caleb had failed. The weight was heavy with failure. He blinked, the brutal summer sun burning the memory away. He looked down at the woman in his arms. Her dark hair was plastered to her face. She was too quiet. Not this time, he thought, his jaw setting. He lengthened his stride. This won lives. Kate was drifting. The pain was a dull ocean, and the heat was a heavy blanket dragging her under. She was floating, lost until his voice pulled her back. Kate. Stay with me, he commanded. Talk to me. Who is Marcus Thorne? He needed to keep her mind working. Lethargy was shock's ally. Thorne, she mumbled, her lips barely moving. Owns everything. The mines, the town. Thinks he's a king. Found records. The chemicals. He's poisoning the groundwater, dumping toxic runoff. Illegal. You went after him alone, Caleb stated. It wasn't a question. Kate's head managed a slight nod against his chest. Had to. No one else would. The department, they're afraid of him. I had the evidence. You got his attention, Caleb said grimly. That sniper wasn't local. My fault, she whispered. The words were so full of anguish that Caleb had to stop for a breath. Just like Mike. Who's Mike? Caleb asked, his voice gentle. He started walking again, his boots crunching on the gravel. Kate's mind wasn't in the woods anymore. She was back in Cleveland. The rain, the smell of asphalt and gunpowder. She was a rookie, fresh out of the academy. Mike was her partner. Her fiancé. They'd answered a domestic violence call. It had gone bad, fast. The suspect had a weapon. Mike had shielded her. He had taken the rounds meant for her. She had held him like this, his blood on her hands. My fault. I wasn't fast enough. I should have seen. That failure had defined her. It had driven her to Ross County, looking for a quiet place to heal, only to find a different kind of corruption. Her pursuit of Thorne wasn't just about the law. It was about redemption. It was her chance to finally be fast enough. And she had failed again. It wasn't your fault, Kate, Caleb said, his voice raw. He didn't know who Mike was, but he recognized the sound of survivor's guilt. He knew it intimately. It was the same ghost that lived in his own head. They moved for what felt like an eternity. The woods were a silent, simmering hell. Caleb's muscles burned, his shoulders screaming from the uneven load. His water bladder was empty. He'd given the last drops to Kate. Sweat streamed down his face, stinging his eyes. Kate had stopped mumbling. She was limp in his arms, her breathing shallow. Kate. Stay with me. We're close, he urged, though he himself was starting to doubt. The GPS said they were near, but the landscape was a maze of identical green trees and rocks. Max, who had been tirelessly scouting ahead, suddenly stopped 20 yards away. He barked, a single, sharp, definitive sound. Caleb looked up, his hope fading. What is it, boy? Max barked again, standing beside a thicket of overgrown brush. He was looking at something Caleb couldn't see. Caleb pushed forward, his own legs trembling with fatigue. He shoved through the brush and almost collapsed. There it was. Not a station. It was a dilapidated stone and timber shack, the roof half caved in, the windows boarded up, but it was shade, and on its roof was a tall, slender radio antenna, rusted but still standing. He carried Kate inside, the sudden cool of the dark, musty interior a physical shock. He gently laid her down on an old cot, its canvas rotted but intact. She was barely conscious. Hold on, he whispered. He moved to the corner. On a dusty table sat a relic, an old solar-powered high-frequency radio, the kind the Park Service had used decades ago. It was the same model his grandfather had kept at the farm. Caleb grabbed the microphone, his hand wrapping around the familiar, cool plastic. He blew the dust off the receiver and flipped a switch. A hiss of static filled the small shack. He smiled, a grim, exhausted smile. Mayday, 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 he spoke into the mic, his voice a raw croak. This is civilian Caleb Hayes. I am at Fire Warden Station 4 Bravo, Ohio Grid. I have a wounded officer, gunshot wound to the shoulder, in critical condition, requesting immediate medevac. He let go of the transmit button. For a long moment, there was only static. Then a voice, faint and broken by atmosphere, came back. This is dispatch. Hayes, we read you. Rescue is on the way. Caleb let the microphone fall. He slumped to the floor, his back against the wall, his whole body shaking with exhaustion. Max, his duty done, walked over and collapsed, resting his heavy head in Caleb's lap. Caleb looked across the small, dark room at Kate. Her eyes were closed, but her breathing seemed to have eased slightly out of the direct, killing sun. They were safe. For now. The first sound Kate became aware of was a quiet, rhythmic beeping. It was steady, electronic, and intensely annoying. The second was the smell, antiseptic, floor wax, and weak hospital coffee. She opened her eyes. The blinding sun was gone, replaced by the soft fluorescent glow of a hospital room. An 4 was neatly taped to the back of her hand. Her shoulder, no longer a searing fire, was a dull, heavy ache beneath a professional dressing. She was clean. Someone had washed the dirt from her face. Well, look who decided to join the party. Kate turned her head. A woman in bright blue scrubs stood in the doorway, hands on her hips. She was in her late 60s, with short, curly gray hair and a smile that crinkled the kind corners of her eyes. This was Brenda, the head nurse at Adena Regional Medical Center, a woman who had probably patched up everyone in the county at least once. Nurse Brenda, Kate rasped, her throat dry. Deputy Sullivan, Brenda replied, her voice warm as she bustled in. You gave us quite a scare. That helicopter landing nearly gave Sheriff Thompson a heart attack. Brenda checked her 4 bag, her movements practiced and efficient. Though not as much of a scare as seeing who carried you in. Lord have mercy, Caleb Hayes. Haven't seen you since you were tall enough to steal apples off my backyard tree. Your grandfather, God rest his soul, would be so proud. Kate's eyes scanned the small room. Caleb, is he? He's right outside, Brenda said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Hasn't left. He and that big, beautiful dog of his have been camped out in the hallway. Refuses to go home, even though he looks like he's been through a war zone himself. He's worn a path in my nice clean floors pacing. Just then, Caleb appeared in the doorway. He'd washed the grime from his face, but his clothes were still stained with dirt and her dried blood. His blue eyes, exhausted but intensely alert, met hers. Max stood beside him, his tail giving a slow thump-thump against the doorframe when he saw Kate was awake. Brenda, Caleb said, his voice a low rumble. Could we have a minute? And maybe some water. Of course, honey, Brenda said, patting Kate's good arm. You're in good hands, I'll send the sheriff in when you're ready. He's been worried sick. Brenda bustled out, leaving a quiet, weighted silence. Max trotted in and lay down at the foot of Kate's bed with a sigh, as if assuming his official guard post. Caleb moved to the small sink, filled a plastic cup from a pitcher of ice water, and brought it to her bedside. He didn't hand it to her. He held it just as he had the water bladder, letting her take small sips. The simple, caring gesture, the act of service, hit her more profoundly than his dramatic rescue. Thank you, she said, her voice stronger. It's just water, he replied, setting the cup on the table. For everything, she clarified, looking him straight in the eye. You and Max. I was done out there, Caleb. He shook his head, a small, dismissive gesture. You were still fighting when I got there. You had 1 round left. Kate was stunned. You saw that? I saw you, he corrected gently. I've seen people give up. That wasn't you. You have a hell of a lot of courage, Deputy Sullivan. The professional respect in his voice, the simple, honest acknowledgement from a man who clearly knew true courage, meant more to her than any commendation. Thank you, she said again, feeling a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. The door opened, interrupting the moment. Sheriff Thompson walked in, twisting his hat in his hands. Bill Thompson was a man in his late 50s with a kind, weathered face and a mustache that had gone gray long before his hair. He was a good man, a community cop, more accustomed to dealing with lost hikers and high school pranks than professional snipers. He looked, Kate thought, completely and utterly overwhelmed. Kate, he said, his voice thick with relief. Thank God. When we heard the mayday, and then Brenda said Caleb Hayes carried you in. He nodded toward Caleb, his eyes full of respect. Your grandfather was a good man, son. It's good to have you back, even under the circumstances. Sheriff, Caleb said with a nod. He stepped back, positioning himself near the door with Max, a silent, imposing guardian. Kate, what happened out there? Thompson asked, pulling up a chair. Dispatch said you were on routine patrol. Kate took a deep breath, the pain in her shoulder flaring as she moved. It wasn't routine, Bill. I lied on the log. I went out there because I had a lead. It was Thorne. Sheriff Thompson's face paled, the color draining from his ruddy cheeks. Marcus Thorne? Kate, we talked about this. You can't go poking at that man. He is this county. He's poisoning it, Kate countered, her voice gaining strength from her anger. I got a tip from a former foreman at the old lithium mine. Thorne didn't just reopen it. He's using the old tailing ponds to dump toxic waste from his other operations. We're talking arsenic, heavy metals. It's leaching into the water table, Bill. The one this whole valley drinks from. Thompson looked tired. We don't know that for sure. That's why I went out there, she insisted. The foreman said he'd leave me the final proof. The shipping manifests. Hidden at that old fire warden station. The 911 call about the dumping was a lure to get me out there alone. The foreman never showed. Just the sniper. A sniper? Thompson repeated the word as if it were foreign in his mouth. Kate, this is beyond us. We have 4 deputies. Thorne's mine has a private security force of ex-military contractors. We can't touch him. So, we just let him poison us? She demanded, trying to sit up. I'll call the state police, Thompson said, his voice weak. I'll file a report. And by the time they're done figuring out jurisdiction, Kate said, her voice laced with bitterness, Thorne will have scrubbed that mine clean, and my whistleblower will be at the bottom of it. That's when Caleb spoke. He had been silent, observing, his arms crossed. Now he pushed himself off the wall. Sheriff, he said. Thompson turned. Caleb. Caleb pulled the small, military-grade GPS from his pocket. He held it up. The sniper left this behind. Max found it. He tossed the device to the sheriff, who fumbled to catch it. That shooter was a professional, Sheriff. He zeroed his rifle. He had a planned ambush and orders to leave no witnesses. He wasn't there to scare her. He was there to kill her. And he failed. Caleb walked to the window that overlooked the small town below. This isn't about state police or jurisdiction. Thorne tried to murder a police officer. He'll try again. He has too. He turned back, his blue eyes locking on Thompson's. You might not have the resources, Sheriff, but I do. He looked at Kate, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. You're not safe here. That sniper or someone like him will be back to finish the job. I can post a deputy, Thompson stammered. With all due respect, Sheriff, Caleb said, his voice flat, that won't be enough. I'm staying. I'll be right outside this door. Kate looked at Caleb, and then at Max, who hadn't taken his eyes off the door since the sheriff walked in. The fear she'd been feeling, the profound loneliness of her one-woman fight, finally eased. She wasn't alone anymore. Thank you, Caleb, she whispered. He just nodded, a silent promise. He wasn't just a rescuer anymore. He was a protector. The small, sterile hospital room felt like a command center. Sheriff Thompson, his hat now back on his head, nervously turned the sniper's GPS over and over in his hands. Caleb stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the quiet street below. Max was a silent statue at the foot of Kate's bed. The state boys will have a field day with this, Thompson muttered, looking at the GPS. It's solid evidence. We just have to wait for the forensics team from Columbus. A quiet digital chirp cut him off. All 3 of them looked at the device in the sheriff's hands. The screen, which had been dark, flickered to life. A new icon, a blinking red dot, appeared on the map. It pulsed over the exact coordinates of the abandoned lithium mine. Next to it, a single word flashed, incoming. Kate pushed herself up on her good arm. What is that? What's incoming? Caleb moved away from the window, his eyes narrowed. He took the GPS from Thompson, his gaze fixed on the screen. It's a trap, he said, his voice a low rumble. What do you mean? Thompson asked, confused. It's a signal. Maybe it's a shipment. Maybe it's the evidence you. No, Caleb cut him off, his mind working fast. Think. The sniper was a pro. Pros aren't sloppy. They don't accidentally leave their gear behind. He wanted this to be found. Kate's eyes widened as she followed his logic. He left it for me. He thought I'd be the one to find it. Or whoever found my body would. Exactly, Caleb said. He left a beacon. And now his boss, Thorne, just activated it. He's either arrogant or he's setting a new trap. He's arrogant, Kate said instantly, her voice hard. He thinks he's untouchable. He's probably moving the evidence, the manifests you were looking for, or destroying the scene, and he's daring us to come. Sheriff Thompson went pale. Then we absolutely have to wait for the state. We can't go up against his security force, Caleb. I told you, they're contractors. We are outgunned. And by the time the state gets here, Caleb countered, his voice flat, any evidence will be torched and the groundwater will still be poisoned. That signal is an invitation, Sheriff. It's his mistake. He doesn't know I'm here. He thinks he's just baiting your department into a fight he knows he can win. He's right, Thompson said, his voice full of defeat. No, Caleb said. He's wrong. We have something he doesn't. We have the element of surprise. And we have an intelligence officer. He turned his intense blue gaze on Kate. We're not going in blind. She knows the layout. The weariness in Kate's face vanished, replaced by a sudden, sharp energy. The warrior Caleb had seen in the woods was back. Caleb looked at the sheriff. I need you to give us the room, and I need you to find a notepad, a pen, and the blackest, strongest coffee Brenda has. Right now, Sheriff. Thompson, startled by the quiet command in the SEAL's voice, just nodded. Yeah, okay. I'll be right back. He hurried from the room, leaving Caleb and Kate alone with the dog. Caleb pulled the uncomfortable visitor's chair closer to her bed. He sat, leaning forward, forearms on his knees. It was the first time they had been truly alone since the rescue. Tell me everything you know about that mine, he said. For the next hour, the hospital room became a briefing room. Thompson returned with the supplies, and Kate, despite the shooting pain in her shoulder, began to draw. Her hand was shaky, but her memory was photographic. The main gate is a kill box, she explained, sketching a perimeter fence. Motion sensors, cameras, 2 guards and a reinforced watchtower. That incoming signal is probably leading us right to it. It's where he wants us to go. Then we're not going there, Caleb said. What about a weak point? Kate's pen moved. Here, she said, tapping a spot on the north side of the drawing. An old ventilation shaft. It's pre-war, built to air out the dynamite tunnels. It's marked as collapsed on all the county maps. Thorne's men won't be watching it. You're sure it's not collapsed? Caleb asked, studying the simple lines. Kate's expression softened for half a second, a flicker of old pain crossing her features. I'm sure it's not, she said quietly. Mike, my old partner. He and I used to explore those hills on our days off. We found it. The entrance is overgrown, but it's clear. It's tight, but a man can get through. It comes out here, right behind the main processing building where the offices are. She had just given him his infiltration route. She knew the mine inside and out. She described guard shifts, 3-hour patrols, blind spots in the camera coverage. She told him about the foreman, the man who had tried to help her, and where he would have likely hidden the manifests. They worked as a team. He was the tactical element. She was the strategic intelligence. He absorbed her knowledge, processed it, forming a plan of attack that was fast, quiet, and precise. I'll take your 2 best deputies, Sheriff, Caleb finally said, looking at Thompson, who had been watching the 2 of them with a mixture of awe and terror. I don't need them for a firefight. I need them to secure the evidence and the prisoners after I've dealt with the guards. Caleb, this is... Thompson began, but Caleb cut him off. It's the only way, Sheriff. You call the state police now. Tell them you have an active situation and need backup, but tell them it'll be over by the time they get here. Thompson looked at the hand-drawn map. He looked at the determination in Kate's eyes and the absolute confidence in Caleb's. He took a deep breath. All right, son. Do it. I'll give you my 2 best. You do it your way. The sheriff left to make the call. The plan was set. Caleb stood, the quiet energy in the room replaced by the tense silence of a pre-mission countdown. He was in civilian clothes, armed with only a handgun, but he moved as if he were wearing body armor. He looked at Max. You stay. Watch her. The dog seemed to understand. He moved from the foot of the bed and sat directly beside Kate's good hand, his gaze fixed on the door. A silent protector. Caleb turned to go. Caleb. Kate's voice stopped him. He turned back. She had pushed herself up, her face pale with the effort and something else. Fear, but not for herself. She held out her good hand. He hesitated for only a second before stepping forward and taking it. Her hand was small and warm in his calloused, scarred one. "Be careful," she whispered, her eyes locked on his. "He's not a soldier. He's not like the men you've faced. He won't fight you fair. He's a snake in the grass. He'll hide and wait for you to make a mistake. Please." The plea in her voice, the raw, personal concern, hit him in a way a firefight never could. He looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. He gave her hand a firm, reassuring squeeze. "I know," he said, his voice low but absolute. "I'm going to end this for you." He released her hand, gave Max one last pat, and walked out of the room. The door clicked shut, leaving Kate in the silence, her hand still warm from his touch. She listened to the sound of his footsteps fading down the polished hallway, her own heart beating in time with the steady, rhythmic beep of the monitor beside her. The wind had begun to pick up, a low, mournful sound that swept down from the high ridges. It was a warning. Caleb Hayes, flanked by the two deputies Sheriff Thompson had given him, hugged the shadows of the ravine wall. "Wind's coming up fast," Deputy Riley, the older of the two, muttered. Riley was a man in his 50s, his face a roadmap of sun and skepticism. He clearly thought this was a fool's errand. Beside him, Deputy Evans, all of 25 and green, just gripped his service pistol nervously, his knuckles white. "It's what we want," Caleb said, his voice low. He wasn't looking at them. His focus was total, scanning the ridgeline of the mine complex, which loomed above them like a dark, jagged fortress. "A thunderstorm will cover our movement." Kate said so. He had stripped down to a simple black t-shirt, his sealed gear long gone, leaving him with just his sidearm, his wits, and Kate's hand-drawn map. They reached the spot she had marked, a thicket of overgrown brush. Caleb pushed the brittle branches aside. Just as she'd promised, a dark, square opening was set into the rock. The old ventilation shaft. "Stay sharp. No lights, single file." "Riley, you take the rear," Caleb ordered. He moved into the blackness, the deputies following. The shaft was narrow, smelling of dust, iron, and dry, still air. It was claustrophobic, but passable. After a quarter-mile of tense, shuffling progress, they emerged behind the main processing building, exactly as Kate had predicted. The complex was lit by harsh sodium lamps that cast a sick, yellow glow. They could see the heavily fortified main gate and the blinking red light of the GPS signal emanating from a decoy drum barrel near the watchtower. "The trap. They're all watching the front," Caleb whispered, pointing. "Let's go." He led them in a low crouch along the building's foundation. His movements were a silent flow of shadow. They rounded the corner and saw the first guard. The man was leaning against a fuel drum, smoking a cigarette, his rifle slung casually. Before Riley could even raise his weapon, Caleb was on him. He moved like a panther, covering the 10 yards in 3 silent steps. He didn't kill. He engaged. A precise, disabling strike to the man's throat, followed by a controlled takedown. Caleb had him bound and gagged with his own gear before his cigarette even hit the ground. Evans stared, his mouth agape. "Secure him," Caleb ordered, and kept moving. They disabled a second sentry the same way. The complex was quiet. Too quiet. And then the world ended. It started as a low rumble, a sound like a freight train, and then the thunderstorm, a true Midwestern gusher, hit. A solid wall of driving rain and wind slammed into the mine. The yellow lamps vanished. The world disappeared into a howling, shrieking, abrasive chaos. Visibility dropped to 0. "Cover your faces." Caleb yelled over the howl of the wind, pulling his own scarf up over his nose and mouth. The deputies fumbled with their handkerchiefs. "We're blind," Riley shouted, his voice muffled. "Good," Caleb yelled back. "So are they." The signal. It was their only guide. Caleb led them toward the main processing building, the source of the beacon. The heavy steel door was unlocked. He kicked it open, and they poured inside, out of the worst of the wind, but into a new kind of hell. The vast interior of the processing plant was a swirling vortex of dust. The wind screaming through the building's ventilation system had kicked up decades of settled lithium and chemical dust. It was dark, choking, and impossible to see. "Flashlights!" Brody yelled. "No," Caleb commanded. "No lights. They'll shoot at the beams." A shape loomed out of the dust and Evans brought his pistol up. "Don't shoot," a voice cried out. I'm the foreman." "He's crazy." It was a terrified man in a work shirt, his hands raised. And behind him, another figure emerged, larger, holding a heavy-duty flashlight. This man wasn't the foreman. He was tall, wearing an expensive suit, now coated in grit, his salt and pepper hair perfectly coiffed. This was Marcus Thorne. He had a cold, arrogant face and the dead eyes of a predator. "You shouldn't have come," Thorne said, his voice calm. He raised the flashlight, not at them, but at a stack of wooden crates piled against the wall. They were wired with blasting caps. In his other hand, he held a cell phone, his thumb hovering over the call button. "My sniper failed. I will not." "Thorne. It's over," Riley yelled, his voice shaking. "So it is, officer," Thorne smiled, a cold, humorless grin. "This plant is a tinderbox of chemical dust. When it goes, there will be nothing left. No evidence, no manifests, and no heroes." He intended to bury them all to destroy the evidence in a massive chemical explosion. The deputies had their guns up, but they were useless. If they shot him, his thumb would fall, the call would be made, and the detonators would fire. It was a perfect stalemate. But Thorne hadn't accounted for all the variables. Caleb didn't move. He didn't raise his hands. He just looked past Thorne into the swirling dust and gave a small, hissed command. "Max. Hit." He had unclipped Max's lead when they'd first entered the building. The dog had been a low, unseen presence, his eyes and nose stinging from the chemical dust. But through the chaos, he had one focus, the scent of his master. And now he had a new target, the threat. Thorne never saw him. Out of the swirling red dust, a dark shape launched. A silent, 90-pound projectile. Max, trained for exactly this, didn't go for the man. He went for the weapon. His jaws, powerful and precise, clamped down on Thorne's right arm, the one holding the detonator phone. Thorne screamed, a high, thin shriek of shock and pain. The phone flew from his grasp, clattering across the metal floor. "Now!" Caleb yelled. The deputies, galvanized, swarmed the panicked foreman. Caleb took Thorne. The fight was short. Thorne was a businessman, not a brawler. Caleb subdued him with the same cold, brutal efficiency he had used on the guards. In seconds, Thorne was face down on the floor, his hands zip-tied behind his back. As the dust began to settle, Riley, panting, looked at the cowering foreman, the bound CEO, and the magnificent dog sitting calmly beside Caleb, tongue lolling. "Holy hell," Riley began. How did you?" Caleb just patted his dog. "He's a good boy." He picked up the detonator phone and the sniper's GPS and handed them to Riley. "Here's your evidence, deputy. State police are on their way. Call your sheriff. This is his win." It was past 3 in the morning when Caleb finally walked back into Adena Regional Medical Center. He was covered in a fine red powder. His black shirt was gray with dust. He was bruised, exhausted, and had never felt better. He pushed open the door to Kate's room. The lights were dim. Max, who had been brought back by Deputy Evans hours earlier, lifted his head from his guard post by her bed, and thumped his tail. Kate was awake. She had been awake, staring at the ceiling, her heart in her throat for hours. When she saw him, a wave of relief so profound it was almost painful washed over her. He looked awful, and he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. He walked to the bed, the silence comfortable, familiar. He sat down in the visitor's chair, the exhaustion hitting him all at once. Kate looked at the dust on his face, in his hair. A small smile touched her lips. "So much for your vacation," she whispered. Caleb looked at her arm in its sling, at the intelligent, resilient eyes that had haunted him since the woods. He thought of the quiet, empty farm he had come home to. He thought of the noise in his head that was finally, for the first time in years, silent. He reached out, his dusty, calloused fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "No," he said, his voice low and soft. "I think it's just getting started." A week later, the Ohio sun was bright and gentle. The heat was tempered by a soft breeze that smelled of barbecue smoke and freshly cut grass. The town park in Chillicothe was filled with checkered blankets, laughing kids, and the entire population of the county. Sheriff Thompson, looking 10 years younger, stood on a small stage. "We're here today," he boomed, "to honor one of our own. To honor Deputy Kate Sullivan, who never gave up." The town applauded, and Kate, her arm now in a simple black sling, blushed. She was standing next to Caleb, who looked uncomfortable in a clean shirt. "And to thank a man who came home when we needed him most," Thompson continued, nodding at Caleb, who just gave a short, awkward wave. "But most of all," the sheriff said, his voice cracking with genuine emotion, "we're here to honor Red Rock Flat's newest, furriest hero." Nurse Brenda stepped forward, carrying a small velvet pillow. On it sat a new leather collar with a custom-made, shining silver tag. Max, who had been sitting patiently at Caleb's feet, was called forward. The sheriff knelt and fastened the collar. The tag read, Max. Heart of a hero. The park erupted in cheers. Later, as the sun began to set, painting the green hills in shades of purple and gold, Caleb and Kate stood under a large oak tree, watching. Max, his new collar gleaming, was blissfully accepting pieces of hot dog from a group of adoring children. He seems to be enjoying his retirement, Kate said, smiling. He's a good boy, Caleb said. He just needed a new mission. I think we all did, Kate said softly. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Caleb, feeling the comfortable rightness of her there, put his arm around her waist, drawing her close. They stood together in the warm, golden light. Two veterans of different wars who had found in the empty countryside not solitude, but solace.